Welcome to Talk the Walk. I'm Jaynie Morris, and it's great to have your company. Now, in this rapidly changing world we live in, we're discovering new and often surprising events, ideas, and challenges that have never been encountered before. On Talk the Walk podcast, my job is to bring to you people who are raising their voices, uniting with others, and exploring solutions, which is the most important part to help us all. My guest today is one of those people. On the 25th of February 2021, a Melbourne businesswoman, entrepreneur, academic and mother, Janine Hendry, tweeted this. Okay, here's my thought. Is it possible to form a ring of people around the perimeter of Parliament House? Then all of us extremely disgruntled women could travel to Canberra on March the 8th and form a ring, linking arms and with our backs turned toward the Parliament and stand in silent protest. Janine, welcome to Talk the Walk. It's fabulous to have you with us.
Thank you, Jaynie. Great to be here.
Why did you put out that tweet on the 25th of February?
It's a question I've been asked a lot, Jaynie, and comes down to a number of things. But as I'm sure you were as well, I was watching the events in Parliament House unfold over the preceding weeks, and my visceral anger as to how the government was handling the alleged sexual assault of Brittany Higgins was just growing and growing. And I thought to myself, these are the leaders of our government. They are the highest lawmakers in the land. And if this is how they are treating women, then how is this view being reflected in the laws that they enact, the laws that impact upon you and I and all of the other women in Australia? And I thought, I need to take a stand. I need to say enough is enough. This is not okay.
And so when in taking that on, and obviously, as you've mentioned, the Brittany Higgins alleged incidents that occurred to her was the trigger for you. Everything we've been seeing in the media, especially since with what has you started with March4Justice. Many of us, especially we women, obviously, have been watching that and going, but you know what? That's been happening forever. So why now?
Great point. It has been happening forever. And I know that I was marching in the 80s as a university student. And I think what happened is I finished university, got on with my life, started working in academia, married, had my children, etc. And I thought, Australia, it's a good country. We do have equality that is enshrined in law. And in fact, I know that because the woman who raised me actually received an Order of Australia for getting the Equal Pay for Women Act through. So I had been brought up in what is quite a feminist environment. And I thought, job done. And so I guess I took it for granted. But I think what happened, and you will probably remember this, Jaynie, but some of your younger listeners probably won't. But before the equal opportunity legislation was passed, pubs in Australia had two bars. They had the main bar at the front where the blokes could go in and drink their beer. And then in a little side entrance around the back, they had what was euphemistically called the ladies' lounge, where the ladies popped in to have their lemon, lime and bitters. just prior to the affirmative action, not the affirmative action, I'm sorry, the Equal Opportunity Act being passed in Australia, many of the early feminists, our early sisters said, you know, enough already. This is outrageous. You know, women need to be allowed to go into the main bar. And in fact, you know, many of the feminists were very famous for going in and chaining themselves to the main bar in protest, saying enough already. So I think what happened is we got the legislation through. We as women all went in and started sitting at the main bar, drinking our beers or whatever we wanted to drink, thinking we've got there. But as we're sitting in the main bar, all of the blokes have scurried out and they're going into the ladies' bar around the back, where they're starting to set up these very patriarchal structures once again. And these structures ended up in our parliament, in our law courts, in our universities, in our business. And they effectively took away the option for women to have a seat at these tables. So we're happy because we're in the bar, but we're not making it through to these decision-making institutions. And here's the issue. These are the places that decide on what products you and I are going to use, how our technology is going to be designed, the courses that are being taught at our universities, and importantly, the laws that are being passed that impact upon you and I. And so, to long answer to your question, you know, we're sitting there having our beer in the main bar, and all of these structures are being set up that are effectively stopping us from having our seat at the table. And what I saw unfolding in Canberra through Brittany Higgins is the very evidence of how these laws are not only damaging women, but damaging our society because of the very inequity that they are supporting.
So that really cracked it open, didn't it, then? You know,
I think that's what happened. It cracked open, and we had sort of, you know, the Brittany Higgins case, but we also had this, you know, this very brave young woman in New South Wales, Chantal Conte, who started exploring and writing about the stories of sexual experiences, but largely sexual assaults that our young people are experiencing. And the day that I decided that I was going to do something, I had actually been reading these stories from Chantal Conte, and I went down the rabbit hole, Jaynie, and within an hour I was just in tears. And like you, I've got sons, and I sat there having breakfast with my 16-year-old son, and I'm thinking, in a couple of years' time, he's going to be launched out into the world. And all of the things that I've tried to instill in him as a young man in terms of sort of equity and responsibility, and let's talk about, you know, sexual consent so that he understands that. And suddenly his role models, they're not going to be me, they're going to be these very people who are walking around and treating sexual assault in their workplace a crime, a very serious crime, and they're treating that as if it's a political problem, and they're the role models. And I just thought, I can't do this. I have to be able to look this kid in the eye and know that he's going out there into a world that treats men and women equally.
And I think that in and of itself is one of the great messages that what you have started here has been sent out to not just women but to men as well. And I think that's one of the great unifying areas of what you're doing. Janine, when you put that tweet out, what did you think was going to happen?
Just between you and me, because we're sitting here having a nice chat. I thought it was going to be me and my 7 mates in a bit of a road trip. We would make our little placards. You know, I insisted that we all wear black and that we'd be standing on the front lawn of Parliament with our placards. But I realised fairly quickly, Jaynie, that the anger that was coming from women, but also from men was visceral. I could just about feel it coming out of my phone, and I'm kind of, the tweet went viral, and I'm like, wow, there's people there, and they're all kind of thinking like me. And I thought, you know what, maybe it is a possibility that I could get, I think we needed 3,770 people to encircle Parliament. So one of some lovely.
How did you work that out? How did you?
Well, actually, it was just a lovely story. So I actually put a previous tweet out and said, how many would we need? And one of my Twitter followers, who's a physicist, did the calculations for me and said, Janine, you'll need 3,770 people. So I said, great. And, you know, it was really sweet. I went and had a drink with Michael just last week, the guy who organised and told me the exact number as a little a thank you for giving me that. So I thought, maybe we can get 4,000 women. And so what I did is I thought, I've got to harness this. I've got to move with this and harness this energy. So I set up a Facebook group and went to bed and got up the next morning, and there were 10,000 people had joined this group. And I thought, oh, wow. But still only thinking that maybe we could do the sort of Canberra thing, but moved to sort of harness that energy and formalize it, and to bring volunteers on board to work with it. And within 48 hours, it was clear that people wanted not only to hold rallies in the major cities, but I don't think people realise we had over 200 rallies across Australia.
Wow.
Over 200. So we had the major cities. So there are 47 major rallies that March for Justice directly liaised with and coordinated. But we had rallies in Rosebud on the Mornington Peninsula, in Robe in South Australia. So there's relatively small communities, groups of men and women. You know, 20 of them went down to the beach with their placards to deal with that. So it was just this extraordinary groundswell. So we estimate 110,000 people came out. But remember, it was a Monday afternoon. It was 12 noon on a Monday. And that was a deliberate choice, because that was the day the Parliament started sitting again.
Mm.
So people were coming out of their workplaces, leaving their universities and their homes to come. It wasn't a Saturday afternoon.
That's incredible. I mean, that's a statement to itself, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And it's just the March for Justice that I attended. One of the things that warmed my heart was the fact that there were students from school, high school students, in their uniforms, several different schools, and they weren't just the girls from those schools, they were also the boys. Yes. And I spoke to a few of them whilst at this particular march, and I said to the guys, I said, you know, what are you doing here? And every one of them said, we're here not just to support the girls from our school, but we're here to support our sisters.
Yeah,
they're actual sisters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that is so wonderful. And I've always said from the outset that March for Justice must be an inclusive organisation, and that means a number of things. It means inclusive of all women, absolutely all women, but it also means that if we're really going to create change, we need our allies, we need our supporters on board as well. This is not just a women's issue. And the thing about equity that some people don't kind of realise is that my equity, you know, giving me my equity or more equity, or the equity that I deserve, that is my human right, does not diminish your equity. And that's been the issue in, I think, our major institutions, in Parliament, our law courts, our universities, our businesses, is that there's this scarcity mentality that these misogynistic structures have to be maintained, because to let the girls in, so to speak, would diminish this perceived power, and it does not. It does not.
Do you think that is the number one fear in the places of power, positions of power in any, and I'm not just talking about government, I'm talking about, general business, even right down to the home, within the home.
Look, I think that I don't know if fear is the right word, but let's go with fear at the moment. I mean, I think that particularly in our lawmaking institutions, our parliament, our law courts, and even in our businesses, we know that like attracts like. And so that people are more likely to bring someone on the board that looks like them. So if you've got a board of white blokes, then it's more than likely that you'll bring another white bloke in. So whether it is fear of change, because human beings, we know, do have an innate fear of change, and we are attracted to things that are familiar with us. So whether it is fear of change, or whether or not it is really that fear of diminishing their power base, I don't really know. I don't really know. But what I do know is that in societies where equity is the norm, so we look at Scandinavia, where equity is the norm, and we look at how that filters through society, they're economically better off. They have higher levels of happiness overall. So personal happiness, personal satisfaction is better off. They're on all their health metrics, they're better off. So we know financially, economically, emotionally, where equity is the norm, everyone thrives, both men and women. And so you kind of think, why wouldn't that be an objective to, something we should aim for, instead of artificially pushing us apart economically and emotionally?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's go to perhaps day 4 or day 5 after the tweet. So now you've got tens of thousands of people all over Australia going, right, we're all doing this, and they're all banding together. What an absolute challenge for you right there and then. What did you do? How did you deal with that?
Was that before or after I had a really big glass of wine and thought, oh,
what happened then?
I thought, okay, let's just do this. So in the sort of 24 hours after the tweet, and I'd set up the Facebook group, I set up an open Zoom. I said, okay, let's just meet on Zoom. And there are about 60 people on that Zoom call. So I started to get a sense of who was interested, and also the sort of skill base that was out there. And I also started getting sort of messages of people. So what I thought is, well, if we're going to do this, when are we going to do it? And my first thought was to do it on International Women's Day, which was 8 days from the tweet. Might have been a little tight timeline, just a tad, but also I realised very quickly that Parliament wasn't sitting on that day. So randomly selected the 15th of March, which was the first day that Parliament was sitting, which gave us two weeks. So I set up a very hierarchical structure, because I'm a strategist. That's what I'm trained in. So I took this, used a very sort of project management strategy perspective, which is quite different from how most feminist organisations operate. It's much more collaborative. I knew that kind of structure wasn't going to work in this environment. So I set up a very small team, which had a lawyer, a PR person, another person with really good sort of human resource skills, and someone with really great tech skills. And then we identified some other people in social media and event management. And then sort of general management, because we needed sort of general managers, and we had quite a number of extraordinary women who'd sort of popped out of retirement and said, I can do this. But you know, women that had had great experience in their working life and super organisational skills. So I had a kind of core team, and then we set up event teams in each of the cities, which were overseen by an event management with a very sort of clear reporting structure, because we were literally making decisions on the run every minute. And then we basically gave up our lives. I organised an Uber Eats account for my 16-year-old. He was quite happy with his Uber Eats credit card, the mum's credit card, and organised that, and then set about and basically worked 16 hours a day, sometimes more, for the 12 days running up. So there were days when I was doing 8 to 10 Zoom calls a day with various people, and there were tears, there was laughter, there was not a lot of wine drunk, I can assure you of that. There was lots of cups of tea and lots of cups of coffee, but we got there.
Yeah.
And we got there, and just extraordinary. I mean, we had close to 8,000 pieces of media released in that 3-week period. 8,000.
That's incredible, and it's an extraordinary feat in such a small space of time. Given the original objective was 3,770 70 people. It's look, it's been well documented throughout the media, the actual day of March for Justice, and certainly very well covered in every state, not just statewide and in Canberra, but internationally. The international spotlight came straight on you and March for Justice, and which was a fabulous, I assume that would have been one of the objectives that you and the team had put together anyway. The day of the march, I do remember that morning as I was getting ready to leave, seeing you pop up on one of the stations, and you mentioned that you hadn't. Oh no, actually, it was your social media first up. Yes, I do stalk you, Janine. Have you picked it up by now?
That you are most welcome, but you can also ring me anytime.
Myself and millions of others, but I did know that you hadn't slept. You made that point that, you know, like a couple of hours sleep or what have you because of it, which is totally understandable. The adrenaline factor would have been incredibly high. But the first point of the day that went internationally viral, of course, was your little run-in in the corridor with our Deputy Prime Minister. So I have to ask you, because it was a classic piece of footage, most definitely. Now, you're running on adrenaline. You've 2 weeks putting this all together, ending up being Australia-wide. You're walking down the passageway in Parliament House, and towards you comes one of the individuals who quite clearly was not going to be a part of anything that was happening on that day. In that moment, your questions and the whole conversation was it seemed so well structured and on point the whole time. How are you feeling throughout that? What was going through your mind as you were walking towards him?
Well, look, a great question, because I had been doing media interviews all of that morning. So I'd come from a space where people were asking me questions, and and here's the Deputy Prime Minister. I felt it was a very polite exchange. What was going through my mind? I think what was going through my mind is, it's time. It's time, mate. You need to answer some questions here, because for so long your government has been obfuscating the facts, and here are the facts, and actually I'd like to know why. I'd really like to know why. And I think, just between you and me, he had been giving a press conference in the press gallery, and I had politely walked around him to get to my next meeting. And in that press conference, he had been saying, well, he was far too busy to meet with me and to meet with the people of the rallies. And I heard this as I was walking past him as a little backstory. And I thought, oh. And of course, the journalists there saw me walking past, and I think they thought this was too good an opportunity to miss out on. So my first concern was, well, no, that is not okay. You can't stand there having the time to give a press conference to say that you haven't got time to see me. That's really not okay. So I guess I just, as we all know, I just really wanted to make it very clear that we'd had enough of reports, we'd had enough of inaction, and that we were here because actually we wanted action, and that was the commitment that I wanted him to give me. And I'm not sure that he's going to follow through with that, but I certainly, at least I will never die not asking him for that.
And at least it's on public record.
Yes.
So then we have the personal invitation from the Prime Minister to meet him in his Prime Minister's office. Tell us about that, Janine.
Clearly very stressful. So the Prime Minister's office rang me on the Sunday afternoon, and I was actually in Parliament House doing some press when they rang me, and my first thought was, how'd they get my number? But let's just pass that one over. They got my number. They got my number. I guess if you're the Prime Minister of Australia, you can get someone's number. And I handed the call over to the people who were working with me on press, and they organised a time for that meeting. And I I didn't really think much more about it, but I then put a tweet up that said, well, the Prime Minister has put forth an offer to meet with him, which was the Monday afternoon after the march. I always knew that it was not appropriate, that I perhaps wasn't the most appropriate person, that if we were going to use this opportunity, then it needed to be really the key leaders in the feminist movement, people who had been working in this space. So I spent some time thinking, well, what do I do? Who actually should be meeting with the Prime Minister? What would be the objective of meeting with the Prime Minister? And sort of pondering, is that indeed the best way forward? Because it wasn't clear. Certainly the meeting was there, but it wasn't really clear. What was really evident by about sort of 10 o'clock that evening, and I hadn't really been on social media much during the day. I'd been really busy doing conferences, press conferences and meetings and things, is that when I got onto my Twitter feed that evening, the response from the people of Australia was, don't do this, Janine. Do not do this. And I thought, you know what? They're the people that I need to honour. These are the voices that I need to honour. For too long, women's voices have been silenced. And part of the issue that we're now facing is that our voices collectively have been silenced. And there is no way I can have this meeting and honour that. So I declined the meeting that evening, and there was still some sort of chat during the night, and the next morning I put up the tweets, and that was something along the lines of, well, we've come to your door, you need to come out and talk to us. And Jaynie, he really did need to come out and talk to these women and men of Australia. He needed to listen to the stories and their voices, because they were very, very powerful voices. And to this day, I believe that he indeed made the wrong decision, both he and also the Minister for Women, who declined my request. I rang her office personally to invite her to come and accept the petition, and I was told that I could email it or post it into them. And I do believe that was the wrong decision, because this was about not listening to women, and they had this amazing opportunity to hear us, and they chose not to listen to our voices. So, it was a tough 24 hours for me. But I did listen. I did hear, people were messaging me and direct messaging me and putting things on Twitter, and I read those posts. And my decision was clear, and it was the decision of the people of Australia. If I thought that I could have achieved something, I would have. But no.
And I think that whole situation is a great example. If we bring it to a simplistic point, it's a great example of how any business, and let's face it. I mean, you can agree or disagree with me on this one, but I always look at governments as a business.
Mm.
Their role is they're the management of that country. So the Prime Minister or the President or what have you is the CEO of that business. So the whole situation that you've just talked to us about is a classic example of how successful businesses are run. And that is whenever they're faced with a situation or an issue that a decision has to be made on, that topic or that issue gets taken out to the stakeholders. The assessment of the response back in is made, and then the decision is made. That's exactly what you did. In that situation. And as you say, it would have been quite pertinent in that moment for that process to be done in reverse and brought out to the people of Australia, but not just people of Australia, the people of the world, because we lead in so many ways. And as you say, what an opportunity missed by the Minister for Women.
I thought so. I really thought so. Out of everything that had happened, she needed to come out, and it was so important for her to come out and stand with the women of Australia and listen to our voices. We're not scary. No. We're really, really not scary. I mean, most other sitting members managed to come out, and I emailed every single sitting member in Australia, inviting them to come to meet with the women of Australia. So,
and many of them did.
Many of them did, and I'm forever grateful. Yeah.
And many of them, I would assume, were on their televisions in their offices inside the Parliament House were on those channels that were beaming it straight in. Janine,
yep.
Janine, March for Justice. There were 4 key areas that you were actually calling for. And if I can just share those with our listeners again right now. So you were calling for immediate investigations into all cases of gendered violence, for full implementation of the 55 recommendations made by the Australian Human Rights Commission Respect at Work report, which was handed to the Attorney General just over 12 months ago, my understanding, lifting public funding for gendered violence prevention, and federal gender federal gender Equity Act. I can't even read my own writing here. Equity Act. How do you think that's going?
Well, I think that there is a little movement, but my anxiety is that we will move back into report creating mode, investigation creating mode, and even with the recent reshuffling of the cabinet, the federal cabinet, I think that the words that come to mind, all sausage, no sizzle. We need action. We really are looking at action. I have no doubt that the government is certainly looking at some of the easy wins. I would have thought is the Kate Jenkins report, the Respect at Work report, that actually has the recommendations, but the issue is really, it's around immediacy. We need to move very quickly. And you know, what we're seeing is that Australia has now dropped to 50 on the world scales of equity. And we've dropped from 13 to 50 in the last 7 years. That's shameful. That is shameful, and it's shameful for all the reasons I said before. Societies where equity is the norm achieve better on every metric. So we've got an enormous amount of work to do, but it's not only legislative changes that we need. Certainly we need an Equity Act. We need this Respect at Work implemented, and we really need more resources into the issue of gendered violence. But we've got to also change the narrative on a community and a cultural and behavioural level, and that's where March for Justice's real power lies. We've got so many grassroots organisations at a community level, and we have asked those organisations to identify the stuff that's happening in their communities. So, for example, in Perth, their Rape Crisis Centre has a 6-month waiting time. Think about that for a minute.
Wow.
A 6-month waiting time. I keep using the word shameful, but there are many other words that I could choose to talk about how horrific that is. But what we're doing is, you know, asking the local communities, and, you know, the other statistic that comes to mind is that our First Nations sisters have 35 times the incidence of sexual assault than what the rest of the population does. So by working on a grassroots level, we have, and we can work with our communities to identify these issues, but also, and here's the really wonderful thing about this, they get to identify the solutions. Yeah, so we'll work with them to say, what do you need to do? We can work with our First Nations women and ask them, because they know, they've got the knowledge. We can work with with other communities, with the disabled communities, to find out what the issues are there. We can work with people in the aged care sector, where there's also horrific levels of sexual abuse and violence against women. We work directly so that they identify the issues, they identify the solutions, and all we do is match the resources up. To solution.
That has actually led me into my second to final question to you is that where to now for March for Justice? Because it's quite clear that you've said and we've all said, right from the get-go, from the 25th of February, that it's time. This has been going on forever, and I have a very strong sense that, as opposed to previous rallies on for anything, my personal opinion is we have rallies, we have marches, we get involved, and then a couple of weeks later it's forgotten. And I feel strongly, and I think most people who have been a part of March for Justice believe strongly as well, that won't happen for March for Justice, because March for Justice, as you've just started to outline, is more than a rally on a day, on a year. So my second to last question to you, Janine, is that where to from now with March for Justice, and what are some of the key solutions or objectives for the immediate future?
Yep. So we're now formalising the structures around the organisation. Given we had 12 days from inception to the rallies, there was a strategy in place, but it was a little, I don't know if ad hoc is the word, but we're now setting up the governance structures. And our intention is to set up a national body, but utilising, and our power will be in utilising boots on the ground, the community groups to, as I said, identify the issues that are relevant to the communities, because they differ. What is happening in the Northern Territory, for example, is going to be different than Perth, which will be different from Melbourne, Sydney, Hobart, etc. So that gives us this enormous access to resources and enormous power to get things done. And I know, as someone that's worked in communication for a long time, that peer-to-peer communication is so much more powerful than organisation-to-peer communication. So getting those kitchen table discussions, those discussions on a community level happening in whatever way they need to happen is where the great change is going to happen, because that's where the behavioural change and the cultural shift is. When we're saying, when men and women are saying, actually, that's not okay. Actually, that really is not cool behaviour. And gosh, you said that was just a joke. Well, mate, it's not a joke. We can start those conversations in a very non-threatening way. We can start to change the narrative, not only in a community level, but down the chain, so that my 16-year-old son can go out into the world and I can know that he is not going to be influenced by these men in power who think it is okay to see a crime of sexual assault obfuscated and viewed as a political rather than a criminal issue.
It's going to be a very exciting and very productive 12 months. And I know that you're ready for it, because you are a change maker, and this is history making change, not just for Australian women, but also men and the communities at large around the world. I have one final question for you, Janine.
Yep.
If you had an 8-year-old Janine sitting in front of you right now, what advice would you give her?
Take the trip, sweetie. Just do it. Just get on the plane and take the trip. Take advantage of the opportunities that are in front of you, because it'll all work out in the end.
Great advice. Janine, congratulations. Is there, I have been asked to ask you this as well. Are you planning on every year having an annual March for Justice event in Australia?
It's certainly something that has been put to us, and it's on the board. So we're thinking about it, because next time we'll have all the systems and structures in place. So it might mean not having to work 14, 16-hour days to make it happen. Certainly it's on the cards, and we're considering it. I guess it depends on the pace of change, really.
Exactly. How can our listeners keep up to date with what you're doing and find out more?
Sure. We have a website which we're just rebuilding again after the march, and that is www.march4justice.com.au, march4justice.com.au, and we have all our socials set up. So it's March for Justice AU. Across the socials, so you can follow us on Facebook. You can have a look at our website. We've got all of the other socials set up, and as we get further down the track, all of our community groups will also have their socials as well. So we're not going away, Jaynie. We are not going away. We're going to be here for the long term, and you'll be hearing from us a lot, I think.
Fantastic. Well, congratulations again, Janine Hendry. You're an absolute inspiration, and thank you for what you are doing, and thank you for taking the time of putting out that tweet on the 25th of February 2021. I think that date, more so than the actual date of the inaugural March, is the one that we need to be platforming and putting out everywhere. Janine, it's been an absolute delight to have your company, and we look forward to speaking with you many, many times in the future. Thank you, Janine, for what you've been doing.
Thank you.
And if you have enjoyed this episode of Talk the Walk as much as I've enjoyed bringing it to you, we'd love to hear your comments. So comment below, like this podcast, and of course share it. Spread the word of Talk the Walk, in particular this episode that we've had with the founder of March for Justice, Janine Hendry. And wherever you listen to your podcast, we'd love you to share it with all of your friends, so that we can make sure that everything that we're doing and all of the people that we're bringing to you can be exposed. We get more awareness for them. We're all linking arms, because we're all doing this just for you. My name is Jaynie Morris. Our website is janiemorris.com. It's been my absolute delight to have your company, and I look forward to having you join us next on Talk the Walk.